Dwarf Fortress is a single-player fantasy simulation game created by two brothers Zach and Torn Adams. It's a colony management-based game where the player controls and establishes their own fortress. Players will perform tasks such as combating threats to prevent invasions, generating economic wealth, nurturing the dwarfs, and picking the best suitable locations to survive. World generation is one unique feature of the gameplay loop that is carried out before the onset of the player's journey. A world generation is a historical procedure that runs out hundreds of years of history in a world map that is then generated for the player. Before creating the world, players are provided options to adjust the world map size, its history length, which in turn affects the more creatures that will be alive, or the more menacing the creatures will be the older the world is, the number of civilizations, sites, beasts, and mineral occurrence. These can be adjusted to the player's liking based on their relative experience. The history aspect of world generation is inspired by Zorn, who admired the time and history of the ancient philosophers and was passionate about learning history. Zorn believes this had to do with how Dwarf Fortress came about. After the generation process, the world map is made and the player can choose their embark location. The process of choosing a suitable location invokes a more strategic playstyle depending on the player's preferred experience. For example, as the player starts to zoom into the world and searches for their embark location, information about the area that the player hovers over is shown in a mini legend on the top right corner of the screen. If a player decides to settle in an area with untamed wilds, then they run the risk of encountering powerful creatures earlier than usual. On the other hand, Dwarf Fortress was a fully 2D game relying only on the X and Y axis, as well as its ASCII graphics. There wasn't a way to dig on the ground or climb walls and buildings. After a while, Torn and Zach felt this was way too limiting as they wanted to add 3D architecture and 3D fluid simulation. This was decided upon when they encountered a design problem when introducing aqueducts to the game. Players are able to build bridges to cross rivers and build floodgates to control water flow. With the addition of aqueducts, it became a complicated problem due to the lack of 3D architecture. 5 months after releasing the initial alpha version of Dwarf Fortress in 2006, Zach and Torn experimented with adding a Z-axis to the game. With this addition, the brothers realized that world generation had to go through a complete overhaul as well. Rivers and chasms will now become giant open lakes and caverns, but the gameplay of going from left to right to discover things has now been transformed to an entirely new game where players can dig and progress in any direction. This version was then released in 2008. Dwarf Fortress is known for its complex simulation systems in modern games, as well as its highly detailed variables on the programming side. Torn would find himself having to revisit code and double-check if everything is working when adding new features. The drunk cat bug was a well-known bug among fans, which stemmed from the addition of poisonous effects that caused dead cats to pile up in people's games. An old footprint code that made cats clean themselves after they stepped on wine or spilled beer was causing them to adjust the alcohol on their paws. Small creatures like cats will ingest large amounts of alcohol, which made them go through the symptoms of alcohol poisoning. The simulation for alcohol poisoning relied on highly detailed variables that interconnected with each other. Any new feature can affect another old variable that Torn wrote. As aforementioned, world generation is one of the key components to Dwarf Fortress's gameplay loop, but Torn and Zach wanted losing to be a part of the experience, with Torn describing it as the entire engine that runs the game. The player will start by creating a world, building a fort, lose, the fortress will be added to the world, start a new world, and repeat the process. However, it is still losing when the player realizes their impact on the previous world they had, as the player can encounter old friends, familiar places, or even old enemies. It's as though Torn and Zach wanted the player to feel connected to the world, and their actions were meaningful or impactful to the previous world when they lost. This persistent gameplay was heavily inspired in Torn and Zach's Dragslate, where enemy groups would appear in the player's next playthrough. Dwarf Fortress would later inspire other games like the renowned Minecraft with regards to world creation and even mechanics such as harvesting and farming for food and resources, as well as interacting with different biomes of the world.